Arcades take on theme parks. Amstrad and Sega team up. And EA buys Origin. These stories and many, many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. Today we'll be traveling back 30 years to October of 1993. No, 1992. It's getting close to the end of the year. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
Yay! The classic bit. So, welcome back to what is definitely not the second time we're recording this episode due to sound errors.
Why would you even suggest that? That's terrible. It's been quite some time. For sure.
Yes.
I'm honored to, I was honored to get that message, and I always love doing this, so I'm happy to be here. We've been having some good chats in the setup too, so it's been a long time coming.
Definitely. It's always good to have you back. So before we get on to the serious business, a little bit of banter, tell everybody what you've been up to over on that far, far less listened to show than this one, the Retro Game Squad.
Oh, I didn't know people listen to us. Is that a thing? No, we've been keeping ourselves busy. We officially had our 10 year anniversary. God, was that October now? It's been a bit.
That's insane.
And we just, probably when this comes out, hopefully soon, we will be dropping our end of the year podcast as well. We just record, I guess, last weekend. So yeah, we've been keeping ourselves busy. I'll spoil it here, but we've been doing Game Boy Color games for this last one. Got some
nice
good ones in there. We talked a little bit about Fish Files with our mutual love adventure games.
And we covered it in our 7 Minutes in Heaven. So I'm guessing you played it for a little bit more than just the 7 minutes.
Oh, I beat it.
Oh,
and I'm glad I did. Yeah.
Cool. So, and since we are talking about adventure games slightly off topic, have you already played through the new Monkey Island?
Oh, I've been taking my time with it because do you know if they're going to be making another one after?
Not as far as I know.
I hadn't heard either. I'm so like, I've just been picking at it because I know like after that may or may not be it, but it's certainly going to be a while until we get more Monkey Islands home.
Yeah.
I'm just picking at it.
Yeah, me too. I haven't actually picked it up again in like a week and a half, and I only play it for like 20 minutes at a time and then put it away because it is, you're right. Once we're done with it, there's no way of knowing how long it'll be before we get another one, if we get another one.
Yeah. And they did such a good job with this one too. It's a beautiful send off if it continues. I mean, I assume it'll be phenomenal to the end, but you mentioned picking it back up too. I love that they added, because it's told from the perspective of Guybrush talking to his son, which isn't a spoiler because you kind of learn that out in the first 5 minutes of the game. And he's like, "Do you remember where we left off?" And it's a beautiful thing because I've spent so many times where games I'll put them aside for a bit and I'll be back and be like, "What the heck was I doing?" And then I have to restart.
Exactly. Yeah, it is such let me just put it this way. The convenience of it is so perfect for a middle-aged gamer like me that it's really a love letter to those of us who grew up playing the original game and don't have the time to sit there anymore and spend 3 whole days trying to figure out a puzzle. It's great. I love it. Hopefully it's not going to be the last. but I don't know what the sales numbers were for it. I mean, I'm sure that it sold gangbusters in the first 24 to 48 hours, but I don't know what it did after that. I mean, if it's got legs or not.
I hope it does. It's on Game Pass right now too, so there's a lot of people who are playing. I mean, think of this too. This might be the first time people are playing a Monkey Island.
That's true. Well, I mean, yeah. Are the Telltale games still available on iOS and stuff?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, yeah, it's interesting. They were the weaker of the series, but still pretty good.
Yeah, they were still pretty good. I mean, I enjoyed playing them but I played them on my phone. It was one of those, pick it up, in a bathroom break, play a little bit, and go back to work, type of things. Yeah. So yeah, that is a good question. I don't know if those are still available. They gotta be. I can't imagine. But then again, a lot of the Telltale stuff isn't available anymore. Or is it back? I don't know. It keeps
I have no idea.
going.
But they give you a scrapbook that covers everything. So if you don't need it, that's the one.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, I got to finish playing it before there's a couple things irking me about the game, but they're so minor that it's not really worth discussing. So
yeah, I need to finish it too. So we'll earmark this for another date for sure.
Exactly. As soon as we both have it finished, then we can have a powwow on it, a special episode.
Look forward to it.
Okay, well, with the banter section out of the way, let's turn our attentions to what really matters, and that is to promote the fact that you can support us on all the trending social media platforms. I will be starting a Mastodon account this weekend, so by the time this goes out, that link will be in the show notes. I am going to become a Twitter refugee here pretty quickly. And you can also support us on Patreon and get access to early interviews. Got a couple interviews up there right now, and another one, a video interview, which will be posted hopefully a few days after this episode goes live on the Patreon. So check that out. And if you haven't downloaded them yet, right before this one, my 2-part interview with Leonard Trammell, son of Jack Trammell and former head of software at Atari during the Trammell era. Great interview, lots of interesting insights. So do recommend everybody check that out. Okay, that's it for the plugs. Let's move on to the first order of business, which is a little segment called The 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-host has to play a game that was reviewed in a magazine dated with a publishing date of, or not a publishing date, but a cover date of November of 1992. And we had a ton of interesting titles. Absolute classics like Street Fighter II for the Super Nintendo, Mortal Kombat in the arcades, Star Trek 25th Anniversary on PC, Parodius, G.I. Joe the arcade game, one of my all-time faves. But we went with a Amiga stalwart, Guy Spy. So, John, are you ready to do some spying with the guy?
I've donned my suit, got my bow tie on, let's do this.
Awesome. Then, let's have at it. Welcome back from your 7 Minutes in Heaven, John. So, for the uninitiated, how would you explain Guy Spy?
It's 007 crossed with Dragon's Lair. No, it's it's a pretty cool... I'm trying to think of it. It's like a over-the-shoulder shooter. It starts out, but you also get put into different scenarios. That was really generic. I don't even know how to describe what I saw. I was shooting some dudes in the face, and then I was fighting a big Viking lady. I don't even know. Oh, I guess she wasn't Viking. It would have been like a large German gal, but...
A large Bavarian lady.
Yes, there it is.
Okay. And so it looked cartoony, would you say?
Yeah, so we had talked a little bit before the show, because you had mentioned that this was done by the people who had ported Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. So if you think of that art style, yeah, ReadySoft. So if you immediately think of that art style, that's this game, except with kind of like a spy disguise to it to keep in theme. But yeah, I was impressed by this one. It was really cool.
Yeah, and this was their attempt, for those familiar with the original Dragon's Lair Laserdisc game, not a lot of interactivity, and those got ported then by ReadySoft using this streaming technology, so it was streaming the animation off of floppy disks, and so this was their attempt, after they had run out of Don Bluth Laserdisc games to port, to create an original IP using the same art style, some of the same technology, but with more interactivity built in. And it wasn't necessarily what you would call a huge hit. Got pretty ravaged in the reviews, and yeah, at the end of the day, it did not give them the jump on that they were hoping for, especially in an age. You have to remember, this is coming out just as CD games are hitting the market. So it's trying to go up against the likes of The Seventh Guest.
That's quite a title to go up against. But I still can't get over this is streaming from floppy, and I guess at the time you would have been playing all the other Amiga games, and I'm coming in from not knowing Amiga at all, so I'm impressed from a technical standpoint, and I had some fun with it, but I could see where it's not the strongest title.
Yeah, it's just the gameplay. I mean, it's a little laggy. It's a little it doesn't flow as fluidly as, let's say, a Turrican 2 or any of those games. And it's the animation is top notch. It looks the part. It just doesn't feel like there's enough meat on the bone, especially for a game that was selling at premium price. And this is the other thing that can't be forgotten. These ReadySoft titles were selling for typically 50 to 100% more than other games.
Holy crap. And this was 5 floppies too.
4 on this
4
one.
floppies.
Yeah. But this is kind of, these things were premium products. And if you look at the old game reviews at the time, they all mentioned how, these things were just absolutely astronomically priced. So I got one review here right now, a German magazine. So Guy Spy was the cheapest ReadySoft game so far at 89 marks. Space Ace 2 had cost 109. The original Dragon's Lair, when it came out, had sold for 140. And to give you a perspective, a typical game would cost you about 30.
Wow. What is the conversion of a mark around that time?
The mark at that time in 1992, I want to say it was 1.5 or 2. No, it was probably more like 2 to 1.
Okay.
So yeah,
that's still a lot, especially again because this is all 90s money too, which is different than now money. So
exactly. I mean, $45 was a fairly reasonable amount for a computer game back then. I mean, cartridges would cost you $60-$70 back in the day. So, but yeah, these were premium products. They were selling them as such. And when the original Dragon's Lair came out, we were all like goo goo gaga that the animation was so fluid on a screen. But by the time you've played the same thing, literally at this point, they've done it 6 times. They did 6 games based off of the 3 Don Bluth games that came out. By then, they'd kind of outworn their welcome. And, So, okay. Would you recommend that somebody go back and give Guy Spy a go?
I think in a retrospective, absolutely. It's fun to see what was done. It's really cool tech. I'm into that stuff, so I want to go back and see if I can get a little bit farther. I don't know if I'm ever going to get past Large Bavarian Lady, but I will certainly try again. So I would say absolutely.
Excellent. That is a glowing recommendation. So, with that being said, let's move on to our next segment, the Department of Corrections, where we check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what I got wrong in our September 1992 jump.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, let's get started. What did I get wrong? Oh, wait. No.
Jeez, Carl.
Yeah.
Carl.
I know.
It's been a long time since we've sat down and done this. Now all my papers are all over the place. I don't know where I am. I am completely in utter disarray, but all I know is that you did things wrong.
You're right. We need to start with...
Oh, that thing. Oh, yeah, the voter comment! Yay, voter! So, voter had the question about the Nintendo Giga Leak, the big leak of data out of Nintendo, and what kind of region it circles around. You know, what is the sort of extent of the data? So generally, the big stuff from the Giga Leak is around the SNES era, 1990 to 1996. That's the primary stuff that is located within the Giga Leak. It does not have everything that Nintendo ever did, or something like that. It is generally focused on SNES games. There's a few things about N64, and think even a couple things about NES, but the majority of the content is 1990 to 1996.
Gotcha.
Which is, of course, some kind of clue for what exactly this was, why it existed, and how it got leaked out, but I'm not that kind of person, so I'm not going to deal with it at the moment.
Of course not. That's not the topic of the day.
No. But we do have a couple things to pen in here. So get your papers out of your pocket, for the Department of Corrections is commencing this very moment.
So what did I get wrong in our September 1992 jump?
Okay, so once again on this topic of Nintendo and CD.
Yes.
Continue to come back to this. And your quote was, the N64 proves their move to CD was never genuine. CD was considered genuinely for the N64. I have talked to people on the hardware team, and they said so. Because the hardware was done in the U.S.
But the executives never considered it.
Well, that's not really... the executives don't make those decisions. Well, they can, but normally that is not the primary consideration of what happens in hardware. I highly doubt that Hiroshi Yamauchi was really that concerned whether or not there was a CD on this thing. There are reasons they made the justification for staying with cartridges, but it was not, oh, we're just going to say CD because people want us to say CD. I think that is completely and utterly out of pace, and that is not at all true. So stop saying that, Carl.
I will stop saying it when I see some evidence that they ever actually went forward. The fact that Square, at that time, probably one of Nintendo's most important third parties.
Okay, I gotta stop you right there.
Didn't even start developing anything for CD?
Square was only big in Japan. For one, you had people like Capcom and Konami. Those are way more important than Square. You had Enix, way more important than Square. So don't ever say that Square was one of the most important devs on Nintendo, because it's just not true. I know you like Square. I like Square.
I'm not a huge fan of Square games, but they were huge in Japan. They would have gotten early access to what was going to go on, and they, from what I've read, they came out and said, "Yeah, we were developing for cartridge." So, I mean, if none of the devs ever got wind that this might be a CD console, my argument is it was never going to be that. I'm sure that the tech guys looked at it, but from what I've now heard from the dev of Seventh Guest, who had a barbecue with Miyamoto, who spent his entire time right after they bought the rights to Seventh Guest, talking about how great cartridges are. I don't think on the executive level of Nintendo Japan, CD was ever seriously considered an option.
Now we're talking about two separate things, because I'm specifically talking about the N64.
Exactly. I'm talking about the N64 as well. I don't
the Seventh Guest wasn't developed for the N64, for one. Two,
because it never would have fit.
Yes, they made the decision to go to cartridges early, but that is not because they just completely disavowed ever possibly doing anything with CD, and this was a decision from the very top of the company, and we are not ever going to consider it, because they considered it. I know this.
But did the execs consider it, or just the hardware team? Because that's two different ballgames. The hardware team,
because they make those decisions.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do.
No way. No way.
Yes, they do. Anyways, because they made, and there are.
That's like the Atari tech people talking about, projects getting canceled and blah 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 blah, without actually knowing what the financial decisions were.
Okay, this is now we're just yelling at each other.
Yeah,
so Carl's wrong. It has been said in the Department of Corrections. Let us zoom around to something else in regards to the cartridge market. You said something along the lines of that Japan did not have restrictions on the number of games that they could put out in Japan. Not true, because Nintendo did control the manufacturing of cartridges. There was a period of time during the NES, the Famicom era, that Nintendo did not have strict control of the cartridges, and then they said that there was a company that made a type of cartridge that did not fit into the Famicom properly. It was probably Bandai, just to say. And then they said, okay, we're not going to allow third parties to manufacture their own cartridges anymore.
So, now how did they enforce that in Japan?
In their licensing agreement.
Okay. So they modified the licensing agreement even for those companies that had existing agreements?
They could have just strong-armed them. It's not necessarily something that needs to be written in the contract of the agreement. It may not have even been something that they very much specified. I don't know. I haven't seen these contracts. But I know that that after a certain point, Nintendo controlled the manufacturing of the cartridges themselves, just as they did in North America.
Gotcha. Okay. That would actually, I'd love to read up on the history of that, because I can imagine there's certain devs that would have been very irked by that.
Namco, most famously, did not like having to abide under new conditions when they signed their new contract. That was more to do with that didn't necessarily have to do with the cartridges themselves, but that's another story. Next up. You made your own faux pas. You said Championship Edition.
Instead
of Champion Edition.
Oh, got it wrong. Okay. That happens.
You went after me for this at one point, so I have to go after you.
Yeah. I'm not going to say that I didn't. It's very likely that I did.
Next up, I'm trying to remember what SF. So you can't compare Wing Commander and SF. I'm trying to remember what SF
Street
is.
Street Fighter?
No, it's not Street Fighter because it's not related. Super Star Fox. Star Fox. That was it.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't compare Wing Commander and Star Fox in the terms of. I think you were talking about frame rate and stuff. Star Fox has actual 3D polygons, whereas Wing Commander in the first one did not.
And this is where I would say to the average gamer that didn't frickin' matter. It was one of them is jerky, the other one isn't.
But which one sold more copies?
That is definitely going to be Star Fox, especially because Wing Commander required a hugely expensive machine to play on. Whereas Star Fox ran on a $99 Super Nintendo.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. But then again, yeah.
But the thing is, even if you had a PC of the power of that could do Wing Commander, that and did true 3D, it would have looked about the same. I mean, there are flight simulators of the time that look about the same, run about the same as Star Fox.
Oh, I don't know about that. Epic comes out a year before Star Fox, and on a PC of the era, it's got at least a solid 25, 30 frames a second.
Star Fox, I think, runs at 20 natively.
No way is that 20 frames a second. That's 15 at best.
I'm not sure, but we will leave that.
This is one of these things. How many frames per second? Okay, now
I told you not to be Googling things in the middle of
Googling these.
Your episodes.
Yeah,
but let's talk about another.
A mod for it that now runs it at 60 frames per second. But
let's talk about another spaceship battle series of some. No, not a series, but game of a sort. You mentioned Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom, the 1982 arcade game by Sega. And you said it fixed the ship to the bottom of the screen, but that's not true. It actually can move in, all in 4 directions.
Oh, that's true. And you have a little bit of height, too. You can't go above, I think, the bottom third of the screen.
No, I think it can go all the way. It's basically Space Harrier before Space Harrier.
Okay, I may just be confusing it with the home ports, because the home ports you can't go above the bottom third of the screen. I played the C64 version incessantly as a kid. But it could be that the arcade version does give more mobility than that. Okay.
And on another computer game note, Westwood Studios, you said they did the Gold Box games. They did ports of the Gold Box games.
True.
They did not do the original ones. They usually had, they did in-house stuff with SSI for that. Usually for lead platform Commodore 64, then Westwood would port to everything else.
Of course. And they had a really good engine for doing graphics and stuff on the Amiga at the time, which came in very handy when they did their port of Dune 2 to the system. But okay.
Nobody cared about the Amiga in 1992, Carl. Nobody. Not a single soul.
They were still selling tons and tons of them every year because nobody cared. I know.
And lastly, this has become a bugaboo of mine of defining what is a visual novel. Your description of a visual novel is heads and text. Now, if that makes a visual novel, then Bionic Commando is a visual novel, Carl.
No, because Bionic Commando doesn't have heads and text as the primary gameplay elements. Those are just cutscenes. You're talking about cutscenes now. Cutscenes don't count as gameplay.
Yeah, you're going...
Because in Bionic Commando, you don't actually influence anything
Carl.
I don't even think the arcade version of Bionic Commando #1 doesn't even have them. The NES version that you're talking about doesn't even let you jump through them.
Nobody remembers the arcade version, Carl.
Of course we do.
Not a single soul. That's all for the Department of Corrections for September 1992.
Thank you very much for your service. Oh, and since we're not doing the 20-year jumps anymore, let's just get rid of the September 2002 correction since we're at it.
Okay, ruining my carefully planned exit from here. Okay, I guess I'm gonna come back, put everything back on the desk, just for a 2002 jump, which may never come. We will throw this into the void.
It's already happened. We're doing the corrections because it already happened.
Sure. Okay. So there's a Peter comment, but he won't hear this. So his catchphrase for this episode was, "This didn't take off."
Yeah.
He just is like, "Oh, this thing happened," and then no, it didn't happen. Okay, so that was the Peter comment. You can tell that we're getting to the half-hour stage of things because we no longer feel the love from the 2000 jumps.
Oh, come on. You can do it.
Anything that was after I was born, Carl's not interested in. We have already established this.
Carl simply only has so many hours a week to produce high-quality, well-researched content. And unfortunately, something had to be dropped. And I was not going to cut corners, especially in the realm of cell phone gaming, in order to simply keep up the appearance of doing quality shows. If I go back to those 20-year jumps, I will do them, but with the full-blown research that my dear listeners have come to expect.
Though the majority of what we're talking about in this Department of Corrections doesn't actually have anything to do with what was going on in the 2000s. It just references you backpedaled into as you were talking about these things. First of all, the name of the founder of SNK is Eiichi Kawasaki.
Eiichi. Okay, thank you.
Eiichi. Then Subrock 3D did not fake a 3D effect. It is anamorphic 3D, technically, it's polarized 3D, I think. But it is quote-unquote real 3D.
Well, yeah, but the images on the screen are still just 2D sprites. They're not actually 3D.
Yes, but do you not call it,
processing.
Is a 3D movie faking 3D in a movie?
Yes. Of course it's faking 3D. There's no 3D processing. It's just two different camera angles.
But do you go to a 3D movie and say, oh, it's fake?
Yeah, of course, it's a movie. It's everything about it is fake.
Well, what if it was a documentary, Carl?
Please, show me a single documentary that isn't quote-unquote at some level faked. That's the whole point of editing the stuff together.
Next up, Mike Oldfield is known for far more than the bit in the Exorcist soundtrack. If you don't know more of Mike Oldfield's stuff, then look it up. He's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. That's what I got off of his Wikipedia entry, so yeah.
Well, that's just nerds being nerds things. He was a big pop artist for a while, after his prog phase, where that little bit comes from. From Tubular Bells, one of the albums in 1973 that sold millions of copies and did not have a single sung word on it. Okay. Yeah, it has spoken words, but no sung words.
Interesting.
So
1973 it was a rapper before there was rap.
1973 was the year of prog, and it was glorious, but I won't go off into this right now.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Next up, Universal did not sell to Activision when they merged. It was owned by Vivendi. Vivendi bought Universal's game division, and therefore Activision, when it merged with Vivendi, got the rights to the Universal games.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
And then, Cryo Interactive, you said it started, quote-unquote, with Dune. It did not start with Dune at all. They made games for many years before they did the Dune game.
Not under the Cryo name, though.
They did.
No, weren't they under a different name at that point? Because they had been that one weird company where they had press junkets where it was all about making offerings to some weird demon lords or something.
They came from another studio, and then that's another point on the thing that they worked for people from. They worked for Infogrames, not Ubisoft, which he said. But their first game was not Dune. Their first game was called Ecstasy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, Ecstasy was.
Oh, that's okay. That's
well, and if you look at the box, the
S
S is capitalized.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, they did Ecstasy, and then they released in 1992 both KGB and Dune, which both used the same game engine. So which one came out first, I'm not sure, but yeah, okay. So there was one game beforehand.
Yeah. So they did not start with that. And they're from...
Okay. But it wasn't that they did games for years and years. They had one game beforehand.
Okay, they were working... A lot of the people who were working together worked as a team for years and years. But
there you go.
That gets into the weirdness of, do people make the company or do the company make the people? Okay.
Only the bankruptcy courts can make that call.
September 2002 is out, and we will see you sometime in the future, in the past, October 1992, for the moment.
There you go, everybody. Okay, thank you again, as always, Ethan, for your service.
Okay, bye.
I will keep the Super Nintendo CD-ROM drive dream alive, no matter what you guys say.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but no, it was vaporware. Always was. There's no evidence of it ever really being real other than some marketing nonsense and the fact that they tried to lock down the rights to CD titles like The Seventh Guest to prevent Sega from getting them. Oof. But with no intention. I mean, I've exchanged messages with the guy who actually developed Seventh Guest, and he actually hosted Miyamoto at his house for a barbecue in celebration of this, and all Miyamoto could talk about was how important cartridges are to Nintendo and how they're so great. And yeah, they never intended. Even he said they had to buy back the rights so they could finally release it on consoles.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, no, Nintendo was basically just cock blocking, which is what they always did.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, they kept saying, oh, no, it's coming, it's coming. Yeah, don't worry about this Christmas. It's coming in January. They never announced a single game. You're going to tell me Nintendo is going to launch hardware in January and by October they don't have any software in development? Come on.
Yeah.
They started developing Super Mario World like 3 years before the console came out.
I believe hardware existed, but the software side, that sounds very on brand.
No. They would have never even started developing hardware, at least not seriously.
What was the prototype that got under?
Oh, no, that's the Sony CD
that's the
add-on.
Sony one. Oh,
Remember,
not the Philips.
We're talking the Nintendo add-on.
Oh, Nintendo. Oh, wow.
See, that's
okay,
the
so
thing. It's the Nintendo add-on.
That's...
Yeah, Sony was going to do their own thing that was Super NES compatible, but the Nintendo CD add-on drive, that was pure vaporware.
Seventh Guest on the NES.
Super NES.
On the Super... Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know. It
could have worked. The color depth would have been there, but the device was vaporware. I am 100%. I will change my mind if I get any shred of evidence of it actually being in development. But those marketing sheets that they kept revising upward every time they found out the Sega device could do something else, they revised theirs up, but never giving any details. All nonsense. But
right,
oh well.
I might give you that one. But
yeah,
we do know it is possible because of that MSU1 that was created.
Well,
as a fantasy chip.
I'm not saying it wasn't possible. Quite the contrary. It could have actually been something really cool. It's just, it didn't actually happen. It's kind of like, being like, hey, if I really did work out and got buff, it never happened.
Right.
But it would have been cool.
But in my head.
Head.
That's fair. I'm a diehard SNES fanboy, so I latch onto every little bit, no matter how true or not.
I love the system too. It's got some of my favorite games of all time. I still have to say, ActRaiser is a piece of genius. But
ActRaiser 2 was not so great.
ActRaiser 2 took away the one thing that was good about ActRaiser 1 and left the part that everybody was just like, okay, I guess I gotta go through another jump and run section that's substandard. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, great, I get to fly around with the Angel again, building and seeing what my people want. Yeah. They learned the wrong lessons from that game. But oh well. Okay, let's move on. that's still in the future. ActRaiser has come out already at this point. So let's turn on the time machine and head back to, and always remember disclaimer, when we talk about this being October of 1992, we're using the cover dates of newspapers and magazines, so obviously everything happened at some point before that. But, so don't send me emails. Let's turn on the time machine and head back to October of 1992.
Sega CD. 1992. Joystick to a whole new world.
Welcome back to October of 1992. John, what is our first headline?
Japanese arcade makers go big.
The arcade industry's biggest show in Japan, JAMA 92, had a clear trend. Bigger is better. The days of the standalone upright arcade game look to be over as game manufacturers focus on larger, more elaborate, and, most importantly, more expensive pieces to populate larger amusement centers. The feeling from the Japanese is that the American reliance on quarter or 50-cent play is holding the industry back. Big sit-down games include titles like Wild Pilot with a 2-player hydraulic seat, Final Lap 3 that can have up to 8 sit-down units linked, and Sega's Virtua Racing, which ditched sprite scaling for polygons. Namco also showed off Sim Drive, a triple big-screen simulator using shaded polygons and Guron shading, with the steering happening inside a real Mazda Miata. The game would never see full production but get reworked and released the following year as Ridge Racer. Sega also showed off the AS1, a motion simulator closed cockpit system.
That is a hell of a lineup. I'm just saying they're digesting it.
Yeah, it's, and this is only a small fraction. I'm cherry picking some items. There's a lot of these sit-down cabinet games getting shown off at JAMA. And it is really a line in the sand. Mm-hmm. And I should also mention here, this is the first JAMA where the manufacturers are not only showing off their arcade games, they literally have their Super NES and Mega Drive games also being shown off at the stands. As if saying, well, this is the product we have for the home, and this is the product that we are going to put in for coin-op. And it's they're drawing this distinction between these two markets, and the American operators, especially the ones who are still reliant on setting up machines and pizza parlors and the like, they can't just go in there and say, oh yeah, we got this giant cabinet that's half of a F1 racer that we're just going to put here. There's no room for that. It needs to be stand-up cabinets that people can stand in front of with one monitor in it.
I would make room at my pizza parlor, just for the record. Standing room only if it needs to be, but...
Yeah. You would, and you probably wouldn't stay in business for very long.
No, terrible businessman. Do not go into business with me. But I will have a rockin' pizza parlor while it exists.
Yeah, and the Americans really, I mean, we've talked about this on the show before. There's been non-stop efforts to try to finally get the dollar coin standardized in the United States, or popularized, I should say. It's been standardized, but popularized. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to my interview with Jim Trucano, the at this point, former AMOA president, he talks extensively about this and how he was even, basically told to his face by a conservative congressman that, his dollar bill, nobody's ever taken this away from me, and that type of thing. So, yeah, this is going to be a big, big barrier to entry. Now, just on a side note, obviously there were some more conventional pieces shown, including Art of Fighting and World Heroes from SNK for the Neo Geo system. And those, of course, are going to be the the jumping off points for the fighting game powerhouse that would become SNK. Sega showing off Golden Axe 2, which is an absolutely amazing game. Sonic Wings, aka Aero Fighters, is a vertical shooter from Tecmo. And the digitized graphics fad is really taking off now. And one of the games that we could have played today was, in addition to Mortal Kombat, was Guardians of the Hood, which, if you haven't played it, everybody needs to go and at least try it to just see what a next generation pit fighter was. Oh, it's bad, especially level 2. Oh my god. Wow, that's just some stuff, racially speaking, that you really do not want to pull off. The second gang you fight against is called the Dreads. I don't have to say anything else after that.
I've only seen screenshots, but
yeah,
we could probably leave it at that.
Yeah, it's really bad. I tried playing it for a while, and yeah, no, it's just bad. But so you got games like Lethal Enforcers, which is, the gun game. You got Mortal Kombat, and a game that I had never heard of before, and I looked it up, called Dino Rex. Have you ever heard of this one?
No, that's a new one for me.
It's Primal Rage, only 2 years earlier.
Oh, weird.
And it's terrible. I mean, it is literally its Primal Rage.
Oh, it's Taito, though.
Yeah, and it's terrible. It is so wooden. It is so, it really feels like,
oh, wow.
little kid with a plastic dinosaur, But
some people might be into that.
Yeah,
wow, this looks like a game.
Yeah, but it's got the little people, running around and stuff, like they're cheering on the dinosaurs. It feels very much like Primal Rage. It just doesn't have the post-apocalypse idea. It's supposed to be, ancient times, dinosaurs, humans, blah, blah, blah. And it just looks terrible. But it's clearly, if the people at Atari, was it Atari that did Primal Rage? I think it was. If they didn't see Dino Rex before making Primal Rage, yeah, they must have seen it. They must have. There's no way that this went unnoticed. But yeah, so, digitized graphics, that's a thing at this point. So, cool. Okay. And speaking of big concepts,
Namco's Wonder Eggs takes on Disney.
Namco, the creators of Pac-Man, have decided to take the large-scale arcade game trend to its natural conclusion with the opening of Wonder Eggs, a theme park featuring dark rides, arcade games, and a 28-person mega version of Galaxian 3. The park was built on leased land and expected to run for 5 years, but ended up running until 2000.
That's incredible, too.
Yeah. I found a bunch of pictures of this thing. Obviously, Galaxian 3 with 28 people is one of those things that can only exist once on the planet, and I'd love to have tried it, but probably also wasn't that great as a game. Just, but more of an experience at that point.
Yeah, more Marvel than gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. It's, but, God bless them for doing it, because, yeah, we need those kind of games. There's no reason why, dark rides at amusement parks can't be more interactive. And I think that that's something that's a little bit missing in our entertainment. I mean, it almost feels at this point in time, 30 years ago, that we were on the cusp of taking the theatricality, if you will, of the dark ride and mixing it with video games. Taking it to that next level.
Yeah, that whole interactivity with it. I'm always a fan of the larger than life stuff, and that's really what the arcades need to set themselves from this new wave of home consoles and even computers, you got to have those experiences that are unique to each game. And yeah, 28-person Galaxian 3 is certainly the way to do it.
Exactly. I mean, it's a round screen. Basically the screen is 360 degrees around the room. Everybody's sitting in the middle of the room, shooting guns at spaceships flying by and stuff. There's ways of doing it, ways of keeping it interesting. And I think that I really think that more could be done with that setup, and I just don't know why it isn't done or why it hasn't caught on more. But yeah, so this happened. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore, but I really, really wish it was, because it's one of those things I'd love to see.
Yeah, that's I don't know, with VR coming around, people are recreating these experiences.
That's true. That's true. You could do that. You could recreate it. If you could get the original game code, then you'd be able to do that. That would be pretty sweet. Huh. Yeah, that's the one thing that still the allure of VR for me is a VR retro arcade.
Oh yeah, all the retro experiences.
You've
VR.
done that, right?
Yes, I have. There's yeah, I mean, there's so many little. Oh man, what was the big VR suit? Not suit, but like the big helmet that was VR before VR was a thing.
Virtuality.
Yeah, virtuality. Yeah, people have recreated those virtuality games, which was the beginning of that whole. Yeah, bringing things back, or even like being able to recreate things like the Virtual Boy without having to lose your non-red vision after playing. So so there were different, I guess, revisions of Wonder Eggs too, if it was around till 2000.
Yeah, every few years they would renovate it. I believe there were at least 3 revisions of it, so they'd shut it down and then bring it back in a revised format, probably with new rides and stuff. There's a link to the Wikipedia entry in the notes. But yeah, the number of pictures and stuff of the place is kind of limited online, and I'm kind of amazed because this sort of would have been the internet period, but at least the sources that I can access don't have a lot. It's possible if I could speak Japanese, I could probably find more, but yeah.
That sounds like a fun rabbit hole for sure.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I'm sure it wasn't the only one of its kind. I'm sure that other people were trying to do the same thing. Otherwise, the entire industry in Japan wouldn't be shifting to these larger devices.
Yeah, that's fair, but they wouldn't have had Namco behind it to drive some of this. So
that's true. That's true. I mean, obviously, in Japan, most of these manufacturers also ran their own arcades, but that's different from making it into an amusement park.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. All right, well, moving on from arcades, or I guess arcade video cabinets, let's move on to Lethal Weapon Pinball goes for the bucks.
The recently released Lethal Weapon 3 pinball table not only has cool features like digitized graphics on the display board and a gun handle to launch balls, but, if desired by the location, will come with a dollar bill feeder. Could this become a solution to CoinOp's quarter dependency?
I feel like there's a spoiler alert coming up.
Yeah, it doesn't take off, at least not for a long time, but it is an interesting idea that you might be able to solve the problem of not having a dollar coin by just, going with something other than coins. And my guess here, and it is a little bit speculation on my part, but my guess is that the reason it didn't take off is just that unless you're in a very controlled environment like a bar with a lot of oversight, or in an arcade with quite a bit of oversight, it's going to be hard for you to make sure that nobody's breaking this thing open to steal the bucks.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that. Yeah, little Johnny's walking out with a fat stack of cash for pants full of quarters. One especially is a little easier to notice.
Especially in a game based off of a cop movie. That's
so
the
funny.
irony on top of it, you know.
Well, I'm glad they had the gun handle grip. I was going to ask if that was part of the equation. At least they know their audience that much.
Oh, yeah. Now, it's not the first game to do that. Terminator 2, I think, is the first one to do that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know a lot about the history of like when things were introduced for pinball arcades, what was latest and greatest on pinball CADs. But yeah, being on brand like that was such a cool, because I've definitely used pinball cabinets that have the gun handle. I was like, all right, this is actually, it might have been Terminator. That's probably the one I've played.
Oh yeah, that thing was so popular and everywhere for so long. That was also the I want to say it's the first one that uses the pixel or dot based display.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So up until then, I mean, if you look at another one that comes out the same year, which is Back to the Future, that's still using what do they even call those displays that it's however many little lines that make up all
the segmented ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a technical term for it, and I'm blanking on it right now. But it was still using one of those displays. Phantom of the Opera, also from that year, I believe, was using those type of displays. But Terminator 2 is the one that brings in the dot display. And that becomes the industry standard up until basically very recently, when everybody just moved to normal screens.
Yeah, just monitors inside these things.
Exactly.
That's crazy. Yeah, this is the beginning of that.
Yeah, it's this period. I mean, this is already a year and a half after Terminator 2.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because Terminator 2 comes out in sometime in 91. And so here we're already at late 92. So yeah, it's about a year plus since then. And so we're seeing how basically these are the features that are becoming standard in pinball machines. And you also have little mini games showing up on the display, which also the Terminator game had. And I don't think they were using digitized graphics, but they were definitely using, a lot of hand-drawn animation. But now they're starting to digitize stuff directly from the movies and so forth for the display.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right, but so lose the dollar bill feeder, keep the gun handle, a cool display. Got it.
There you go.
Yep.
Recipe for success.
Speaking of adding features, Street Fighter II Championship Edition gets modded.
You are on fire with the transitions. I love it. After a flood of pirated boards, the latest assault on Capcom's moneymaker are modification boards and chips. Some mods are reported to almost double the game's coin drop. Capcom has promised to not take this lying down and will both go after modders and offer its own modifications soon.
So if I'm not mistaken, and we're appearing a little bit farther in the timeline, this is what led to... Or I guess this would have been Rainbow Edition, right? And what led
This is Rainbow Edition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a mod that's come out, and yeah, it's the thing with the Street Fighter II games are that there's this constant hunger. The U.S. coin-op industry has been in the doldrums for years. Street Fighter II is the bright light that is lifting the industry, at least lifting the operators out of, break even. And the original Street Fighter II just dropped on the Super Nintendo. So there's this push now. We need to keep the kids in here. We need to keep adding stuff to this game. And yeah, there's no replacement. There's no other game on the horizon. Well, Mortal Kombat is going to be that game, but there was no other game on the horizon at the time these mod chips started showing up that could keep the industry going. Everybody has this gut feeling, if Street Fighter II fades, we're left high and dry again.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because people are committed to these Street Fighter II championship boards, and they can add more features by buying these mods.
Well, yeah, and a lot of them had to buy the Street Fighter II Champion Edition as a standalone cabinet. Remember, it was not originally... Capcom refused to sell it as an add-on board originally in North America. They did it overseas, but not in North America. And then the gray imports started coming in, the so-called parallel boards, and then they were forced to offer it as an add-on board. And now these mod chips are coming on top of it all. So, and they will come out with their own version of a mod for it, giving some more options. But obviously, you know, they're going to keep the Street Fighter 2 thing going. After Champion Edition, we get I think then we get Street Fighter 2 Turbo is, I believe, the mod version that Capcom releases. Or is it? There's so many different versions. But no, Turbo is the mod that they release for Champion Edition. And then they do Super Street Fighter 2, and then they do Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
You did better keeping track of that than I did.
I'm just going through my head the console ports. So it's Street Fighter 2 on the Super NES, then Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition on the Genesis, then Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the Super NES, and then Super Street Fighter 2 on both systems, and then Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo on both systems. Wow.
What a time to be a Street Fighter fan, that's all I have to say.
Dude, all of these cartridges were hugely expensive carts. And, I mean, Street Fighter 2, and we'll talk about this in a later story, is the biggest cart on the Super NES so far. And they're charging extra for it for those extra chips that are in there.
Yeah, they had to do an extra chip so that they could do compression of the graphics in real time and decompression.
Yeah.
From what I remember. That was, or you could just go to the arcade and play.
Or you could just go to the arcade, but, you know, you can go through those 50 cents really fast in the arcade. I mean, if they sing the 50 cents play, even if you're paying $60-$70 for the cart, that you can blow through that money real fast in an arcade on Street Fighter 2. Fair. Especially if there's one asshole who's really good at it and he just comes in and keeps ruining your game. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I don't have any resentment built in there. No.
I will say, dropping some knowledge on the Retro Game Squad podcast, I'm working on a mini episode for ROM hacking, and this was one of the games that came up as a really early example, especially of a not first party people modifying code to get more out of their games. This was a good example of that. Because I know previously there was some internal stuff, because that's how Miss Pac-Man came around.
No. Miss Pac-Man is external. Oh, Miss Pac-Man is very much external.
Oh, yeah, but it started... I mean, they modded the Pac-Man code to add the... The story there. The story is there was these college kids who started a company, and they started by modding other games. Their biggest one was a mod for Missile Command. Oh, okay.
And then they got sued. And basically, as part of the settlement, they had to promise not to release any more mods. But they had already started working on a mod for Pac-Man that was going to... the new name for the game was... I'm blanking on it. I'll think of it when I don't need it anymore. We talked about it on one of our jumps last year.
Oh, neat.
One of the 40-year jumps. And so as a result of that, they suddenly had this mod for Pac-Man that changed the graphics and all this stuff. And they couldn't do anything with it, so they essentially sell it to Midway and then rework it into Miss Pac-Man. And this is why Miss Pac-Man does not come from Namco.
Oh,
it comes from Midway, because Midway had this very open license where they could use Pac-Man for almost anything. That's why it also shows up in this weird game where there's a juggling clown. We did a 7 Minutes in Heaven. Mads played it a while back. And that actually even gets ported onto the C64. And Pac-Man shows up in it for no reason whatsoever. Suddenly there's Pac-Man in there. And so, that Miss Pac-Man starts out as a external unlicensed mod, but because of Atari's action against them and they're barred from doing mods for anybody, they end up selling it to Midway and reworking into Miss Pac-Man.
Got it. Yeah, I have to review my notes. I'm pretty sure that was in there, but I was just.
Oh yeah, no.
But that's. I'm glad we're able to set the bar straight here. But
oh yeah. If you want, I got a whole bunch of information on that still from my notes. So we'll talk about it after the episode.
My people will call your people, but
exactly. Well,
I know where you live. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's still a famous. Well, it's still a famous example of a mod like that taking off, and it is cool to have them. See them have happy enough endings so that.
Oh, definitely. Finding new ways to use old hardware is absolutely one of the best things in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's all there is to it, and it's fun to watch because you suddenly get creativity. I mean, Donkey Kong in some ways is that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was originally a very different, and they suddenly had all these cabinets, they had the hardware, and the game that was in there sucked. I know, Ethan, you have some respect for the game. No, it sucked. And they suddenly needed to put a different game in there, and they make a new game that will run on that hardware so they can use those cabinets again. And that game happens to be Donkey Kong. So, yeah. There's lots of that. So let's keep moving.
Let's keep moving to another system that had really awesome Donkey Kong on it. Game Boy gets a job.
Very nice. The Workboy, a keyboard add-on for the Game Boy that will add a 32K cart and application software to Nintendo's handheld, has been announced, making it an affordable portable computing device.
Now, my mind draws similarities to what the Palm Pilots did, but this is an extremely limited Game Boy implementation.
Yes, but it does have the benefit of an actual physical keyboard.
True.
And the Game Boy at this point is retailing for, I believe, $60. So it's, this would put you way, way, way below the price of a Palm Pilot.
Mm-hmm. Do we know what the suggested retail for the Workboy was going to be?
No, that I couldn't find. Okay. But then again, since it gets canceled so early, it's not surprising that never comes out.
I was going to say, they may not even know. I do know that a prototype was made.
Yes.
And that was on Earth recently, wasn't it?
Yeah. That actually surfaced a few years ago, and there is links to video of it and a video about it resurfacing in the show notes. So it doesn't come out 30 years ago. We do know that it existed. Obviously, it did have some serious limitations, and that's probably the reason why they didn't go forward with it. Just because, it is an idea, but it does also show how big the push was at this time for getting mobile data processing, IT hardware into the world. Because laptops are starting to come into their own at this point, but they're extremely expensive if they're going to be able to do anything. Things like the Palm Pilot, I think that's already out, or some early version of it's out. I believe the Newton. Yeah, the Newton's out already too, or at least has been announced. We talked about it on the show. But it's just, there's so many attempts to get stuff out there. And this kind of just makes sense. Game Boy has sold millions and millions of units. Lots of people have them. Why not piggyback on this tech?
Yeah, that's the elevator pitch right there.
Yeah.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, and I can't remember I know it was for the Super Nintendo, but did the NES have banking software that was released to it?
In Japan, yes.
In Japan, yeah, I should ask.
Yeah, the Famicom.
All this was in Japan. Yeah. So there was already intention to gaming consoles doing this kind of stuff. Imagine being able to do bank work from your video game system.
Yeah, there was an announced, there were several projects announced with different telecom companies in the US to try to get the NES online. And we've talked about them over the last couple years, but they pretty much all failed. There was even one, I believe, in Wisconsin where they were trying to use it as a lottery machine. So you could, buy virtual lottery tickets and, do like your own scratch offs on an NES screen and stuff like this. The problem, I think, and this is again a little bit of speculation, very much a lot of speculation on my part. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that you had the baby bells in the States. You didn't have a unified system for the telephone system. So any deal that was worked out would have been regional instead of national.
Yep.
As opposed to Japan where, you do it once and that's it.
Right.
And I think that limited the ability to do this. It's not until the internet gets unlocked in 1994 that you can bypass the regional monopolies of the baby bells and say, okay, now we have unified hardware and that's it.
Got it.
Yeah. So, but there were many, many attempts to do different things with the NES in the States, but none of them ever take off. And even though, I'm sure that there would have been a market for almost all of those, it's just, how do you bypass that fragmented infrastructure question?
Yeah, absolutely. But good on the Workboy devs for trying to run with a cool product.
Definitely, definitely.
All right, well, going from handhelds fully back home, piracy comes to consoles.
While pirated carts are nothing new, disc-based copying systems are finally making cartridge piracy something everyone can take part in. The Super Magicom and the Magic Drive are devices that will load the contents of games onto 3.5-inch floppy disks for the Super Nintendo and Mega Drive, respectively. While they are limited to 16 megabit games, and at this point only Street Fighter II hits that massive size, they do reduce the cost of ripping a game down to just what a few floppy disks would cost.
That's interesting, but I'm sure outside of what these, floppies being cheap, these devices weren't cheap, were they?
No. So there's this is all being profiled in a German games mag. I am definitely sure American game magazines would not have dared to report on these type of devices due to the simple fact that they'd be afraid of being accused of, supporting piracy or something. Mm-hmm. The German mags did not have that much of an issue with it. I remember I lived in Germany at this time, and I remember seeing articles about this stuff quite frequently in the magazines for quite a while, because it was a big topic. And because it was mainly a computer game industry over there, piracy was so rampant and so all-pervasive. The major Amiga games magazine in Germany, Amiga Joker, which lived way, way past most people's expectations, it ended up being like the last Amiga games magazine on the planet, as far as I know.
Oh, wow.
It lasted until like 96 or 97 or something. And that's years after Commodore went out of business and you couldn't even buy the machines anymore. So they had a monthly one-page column which was just about what's going on in the hacker scene. And the not hacker as in, let's hack something and get into systems. The hacker scene in the sense of which copy protection has been broken this time and which illegal distributor groups is doing this or that, or what was going on at this party or that party, because these sceners would get together in these big parties, and their little their intros, when you loaded up a game, they'd have like a cool intro with music and scrolling text and all this stuff where they'd show off their programming skills. They would have these parties and show them off and give out prizes and stuff, and they were reporting on these things in these magazines every month. So very, very different attitudes. But
yeah, that's interesting. I know there's a notable lack of record of, how the hacking scene progressed. I was watching an interesting video on that. Like, it was really just the big scene releases and I guess hacking parties that happened that was kind of a chronicle of that, and it's cool to see a magazine actually bother to keep track of that, especially for a historical record.
Exactly. I mean, Amiga Joker is really phenomenal for that. There's other aspects of that magazine that were never great, but the fact that they had that column every month really does help give some perspective to what was going on. So yeah, and but they're not the magazine that's doing this. It's another magazine that's dedicated to consoles, and they report that the devices are each selling for about 750 marks, which at the time is calculated to about $525. I ran this through a program, so I may have been wrong. 1.5 times. Yeah, so 1.5 times, and. This is at a time when you can buy a bare bones Genesis or bare bones Super Nintendo in the States for $99. So obviously not necessarily super cheap devices. But, you can boot them off of floppy disks, and there's also an option to connect it to a PC and be able to access the files off of a hard drive. So, if you want to just, play pirated games, probably not something you're going to have at home. But if you are looking to, rip the games and put them onto ROM cartridges, this is a pretty cheap way to get into that business.
Yeah, I'm just picturing a bunch of homes with their SNESs strapped onto the side of computers, loading their stuff off of it.
Yeah, not necessarily impossible, but what it also allows you to do is mod. You can now take the ROM files apart, start messing with them. If you wanted to translate a Japanese title that didn't get a release, this is where you start. Mm-hmm. And when the internet opens up in a couple of years, it's going to be these devices that are going to allow a lot of those ROMs to suddenly proliferate online. So it's interesting that it's there. It's interesting to see where the technology is, and also at the same time, just to think about what would have happened if this thing had cost half as much. Absolutely. How many people would have bought it at $250? It's still expensive, but when a game like Street Fighter 2 is costing you $60-$70, it's like 3 games.
Yeah, on a lower profile, absolutely. I guess it would be for someone who wants to play it all.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Again, wares or pirated software. Everybody who had a computer back in the day had the long boxes of discs. Mm-hmm. Hundreds and hundreds of discs with games on them, and you didn't play them all, or didn't play them all very frequently, or didn't play them for very long. Your experience of games wasn't, well, now I bought this thing, now I have to spend every waking hour playing this game. It was like, if it doesn't capture your imagination within 10 minutes, well, you just moved on to the next game, which was probably not a great attitude to have, but it was a side effect of the availability of software.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's we're inundated with games now, but to be able to have that in that generation.
Yeah. Well, and that's the weird thing. It's like the inundation of software we have today through things like Steam is not new to my generation of home computer players. Mm-hmm. For that reason. So, I don't know. For somebody who grew up on consoles in this time period, this would seem like a revolution of having lots of cheap software. For computer gamers, it was like Tuesday.
Right, yeah, I definitely had a lot more games I knew what to do with on computer, but a lot of the households who would have these consoles, you had that one game and you played the crap out of it. You knew that game in and out, and you're getting your money out of that because mom and dad gave you the allowance to get one game.
Exactly. And it is just very, very different. Oh well. Oh, the good old days.
Right, yeah, but we digress. Speaking of having all the games, Action Enterprises announces Action Game Master.
The people who brought us the Action 52 have announced the Game Master, a portable system that will be able to play NES, Genesis, and Super NES cartridges with appropriate adapters, as well as have a TV tuner adapter and a CD-ROM add-on, and costs just $159. Of course, Cheetah Man 3 will be a system exclusive.
Oh, where would we be without Cheetah Man 3 on the system that slices and dices and takes your cat for a walk?
Yeah. This is it's vaporware. Speaking of vaporware,
no, this totally came out. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I totally remember playing my Action Game Master.
Sorry, there's just, again, there's so much to unpack here, if that wasn't inherently obvious.
Yeah, so the idea of this, and there's a link to a, I guess, promotional a bit of artwork for it. The idea would be that you have this device that's kind of wide and has grips on the sides, and you would be able to plug in CPUs. So the add-ons would actually have the hardware of an NES or Genesis or Super Nintendo in it, and then with the appropriate cartridge slot, so you pop in the cartridge and then play it on a tiny little LCD screen. Obviously, there's no way in 1993 that you could produce this for $159 retail, even if you didn't have the add-ons for the other consoles included. Even if you were charging like $50-$60 for each of those, there's just no way that this makes any financial sense.
No.
Especially from a relatively small manufacturer like Action. There's no way they're going to be able to get the economies of scale to get this up and running.
But they brought us the Action 52.
I know, 52. Great somethings on a cartridge.
I do encourage checking out the show notes and looking at the proposed artwork of what this thing could have been. We might have had a console that would have been bigger than the Atari Lynx. It's wild to think about. We might have gotten it.
This is true. It probably would have had to be huge. I mean, just think about if you have to have a slot for an NES cartridge. Remember how big those frickin' things were.
Yep.
I don't even know how this would fit in your hand. It would be totally lopsided, and it would be pulling you down the whole time with its weight. It's like, I don't know. It's just...
You could tell the kids who had this console because they'd just be super buff on their arms and like nowhere else.
I don't do steroids. I do Game Master.
All right, we should probably stop.
Yeah. Let's move on. Move on.
All right. Next topic. Super Graphics is dead.
NEC's Super Graphics has been put out of its misery. The failed upgrade to the TurboGrafx 16, the system did not attract sufficient third-party support, and, with only a handful of titles to its name, has now gone the way of the dodo.
Literal handful. Like one hand.
Yeah, I think it's 3 games total that it got that were exclusive to it. I mean, it still it was backwards compatible, but still, yeah. This thing is it was not a success. And I think that Nintendo's decision to scrap backwards compatibility for the Super NES is a wise decision, and the wisdom of it is proven out by the Super Graphics.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. Because, I mean, yeah.
I was going to say, I do know that the Super Nintendo CPU it had a mode that could run like the NES, but everything else was so wildly different that they didn't pursue it. But yeah, that's interesting regarding the super graphics. All I remember about this thing is that it was just like this nuts and bolts, just chunky looking console.
Yeah, I always thought it looked like a motor block.
Yes.
And there was no reason for it to look that way. There was no explanation of why it looked that way. And the fact that they launched it with apparently virtually no software in development.
That's incredible.
It boggles the mind. I think they got a really souped up version of Ghouls and Ghosts, and I don't even know what the other titles were. It doesn't really matter.
Right, exactly. You have to wonder what a world was like where this actually like took off and NEC was a big player.
Yeah, and I think the real problem is that the Turbo Graphics, or the PC Engine as it was known in Japan, was big enough to sustain itself, and they just didn't add enough to differentiate themselves from the other next-gen systems on the market. Mm-hmm. Genesis had, the coolness factor, and it was the first out of the gate with a true 16-bit processor. Well, no, okay, that was the Intellivision, but true 16-bit graphics. And Super Nintendo, comes out of the gate with its awesome Mode 7 to, astonish the world, and a super strong software lineup coming in the first year.
Yep.
But these guys just was like, well, we built it, and yeah, so sad.
Just kind of there.
Yeah.
Well, in other NEC news, Turbo Duo hits the U.S.
NEC's Turbo Duo, an all-in-one unit that combines the TurboGrafx 16, TurboGrafx 16 CD-ROM, and the new Super CD-ROM add-on card for the TurboGrafx 16 into one unit, has launched in the USA. The system boasts 256K of RAM and upgraded CD games. Will it be able to help NEC's system finally move out of a distant third place? The answer is no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a spoiler there too.
Yeah. It's too little too late, unfortunately.
I've seen one of these in person, though. They're pretty slick looking.
Oh, yeah. No, the original Turbo... Have you ever seen a PC Engine?
Yes.
Is it a big console?
No, it's not.
It's very tiny.
The TurboGrafx we got was a lot of plastic with a small board in it.
Exactly. And so there was a lot of room to be slick with the Turbo Duo, because you literally, if you look at the TurboGrafx 16, the slot is on one side.
Mm-hmm.
If you just move the controller ports over to where the slot was, there's about half of the console was just empty space. You could easily put a CD-ROM drive in there and have this really sleek looking design. And, this is what they needed to do. They should have launched both the CD add-on and the Turbo Duo as two parallel products. Because I think that, number one, it would have reduced costs, and number two, people going into the store, and when the original CD-ROM came out, and I think it was 2 years earlier, it was just too confusing to people. It's like, well, I buy the console, then I got to buy the CD-ROM drive to add to the console. They needed to have an option that was easy, and by the time they finally do this, it's too late because, well, Sega CD is coming. Nintendo is hyping up everywhere that they're going to have a CD-ROM drive. And yeah, it just doesn't have a shot. And then again, it's also promoting games like it came from the desert, and that's not a great advertisement for CD-ROM software, unfortunately.
You have to wonder a world where NEC actually made the right decisions at the right time. Although there's no playbook for this kind of stuff, so you got to respect them for doing it. It's just unfortunate when you see that stuff happen a little too late.
Yes, it really is. I mean, they had some good games, Bonk, and stuff like that, but it's just too little too late. And the fact that the TurboGrafx 16 is still saddled with that 8-bit processor always holds it just that little bit further back.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, talking about packing things into consoles to go into consoles that get you packing, we got 16-bit light guns have arrived.
Oh, that was hard, dude. That was hard. Getting and packing.
I was sitting on that one for a little bit. I hope that landed okay.
Yeah, it landed okay, just like the Hindenburg did. No, just kidding. Okay. Both Nintendo and Sega have launched their light gun peripherals for their 16-bit machines. While Nintendo went with a bazooka-shaped gun, Sega has the futuristic Menacer with optional stock. Neither will set the world on fire, but they will become fun props during the anti-violence hearings in Congress.
The only reason packing came to mind is because when I played through Yoshi's Safari recently, and there's nothing like Mario just rolling in, just packing a bazooka, riding on Yoshi, ready to shoot some stuff. That's just, it's too good to make up. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, they had a bazooka, and they were trying desperately to make it not sound like a bazooka, or not. It's not a bazooka. We're not doing that. We're the non-violent guys. Our Mortal Kombat doesn't have blood. Yeah, I think at this point both of them felt obligated to have a light gun, but I don't think either one of them actually believed that they needed to have a light gun on the system. Unlike in the previous generation.
I was going to say, yeah, the NES definitely fit well. The SNES, the games that existed were they had a place, but I mean, the graphics and everything were far enough that you could have much more meaningful adventures than I just need to shoot this on the screen repeatedly until it goes away.
That's true. Yeah, it's kind of sad because I agree with you. The light gun has a place as a gaming peripheral that is sadly often underutilized. I mean, I always think of my favorite light gun game of all time is Ghost Squad. Have you ever played that in an arcade?
No, not an arcade. I believe I played like an emulated version of it.
Yeah, it got a port on the Wii.
Okay, maybe that's where I played it.
Yeah, and it's got these wonderful features, where it's like little mini games in between, like, cut the right wire on a bomb and stuff like this. And it had this awesome feature in the arcades where you had this little credit card and that had your save game on it.
Oh, neat.
And so there's, I think, 20 variations of each level. So every time that you play again, so if you complete a level, the next time you come in, you get the next iteration, and there'll be completely new paths. The enemy layout will be completely different, different mini games, and so on and so forth. So it always stays interesting. And you upgrade your weapons, upgrade your character, get new suits, and all this fun stuff.
Oh, it was a Chihiro title. So that was the Dreamcast, right?
Yeah. No, Naomi would be Dreamcast.
Oh, okay, so this was the Saturn then.
No, this comes afterwards.
All right, I know my arcade hardware clearly, so I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, this is post Naomi. So this is already beyond the Dreamcast. And and that's why it gets a port to the Wii.
Oh, okay, that's why I know this, because you can put 128 megs in the original Xbox to play Chihiro titles, so I was going backwards when I should have been going forwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it, that's cool. Well, mentioning the mini games, my favorite light gun game has to be the Point Blank series, any of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those are great.
I also really like Police Trainer, but that's digressing. But back to bazookas and
Yeah.
I mean, without these, we wouldn't have had a home port of Revolution X, where music is the weapon.
Did that even have light gun support on the Super NES or Genesis? That may have actually just been cursors. That is an excellent question. Wait, we can solve this because, as everybody knows, and I'm just going to try to eat up time while I'm doing the search. Revolution X was probably one of the last flailing attempts to use digitized graphics in an arcade game, and was, how do I explain it? It was an attempt to do a light gun game built around Aerosmith, and that really, do I need to go into any more detail other than it was a attempt to do it built around Aerosmith? It was pretty bad. So the Genesis version does not seem to support a light gun. I'm looking here at the back of the box, and I don't see mention of the Menacer. I just see one or two players.
I saw a review of the Genesis version, and the comment was the Genesis version desperately needed light gun support.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the SNES version did. It at least supported the mouse. I do know that.
Oh, really? It supported the mouse. Yes. That is pretty kick-ass. That would actually make it interesting. But I don't have a scan of the box art here for the Super NES version, unfortunately, on Moby Games. So I cannot say if it supports it. Weird. But this was still published by Acclaim.
Fodder.
This is going to be Department of Corrections will be able to tell us if this was box here. Oh wait, maybe we can even find it. Oh, here I found a scan of the box. And what does it say? Yeah, I agreed. Jump cookies on me just so I can do this. See, everybody listening at home, I have accepted cookies I did not want from a weird website for you. That's the kind of dedication that we have here at the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I don't see any language here about light gun support. And there's no symbols for either light gun support or for the mouse.
I was gonna say I miss all the standardizing of that little row of things of what they support.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm convinced that it does until you convince me otherwise. So,
well, I know what I'm going to be playing tonight then to solve this, but I will not. I will be too lazy to come back and add it in. I will add a note in the show notes. Giving us an explanation of whether or not it is or is not included.
There we go.
Dum.
I have a GunCon 3, which was the one that used IR sensors, and that can hook up to the Mister that I can then run to the Super Nintendo core to find out. I will be boots on the ground as well on this one.
Excellent. Oh, dude, I want one of those GunCons so bad. I've got a Wiimote set up for my computer right now. To do light gun games.
But we need to talk. So. I built my own light sensors because the guns are cheap, but the sensors like hundreds of dollars, and you can build them yourself pretty easily. We'll talk.
Well, I just have one of these USB Wiimote bars.
Yes, I was using one of those for a while until I just got these for the Mister, and I found out they work well with MAME.
Oh,
as well.
Okay. So. Yeah, definitely we need to talk then about that because, I've got my setup, but what I haven't been able to do yet is get it to work on my Raspberry Pi.
Ah, that's the one.
And that's where I really want to be able to use it so I can play some games on my big screen. Got a laptop downstairs, which I've played a little bit of House of the Dead. What's the one from the Wii? House of the Dead Overkill.
Yeah, that sounds right. I've been playing, on MAME I've been playing Alien, one of the Alien shooters on that one. That one's really good.
The arcade? Alien 3?
Yeah. Whatever arcade port of that was, but that was one of the ones I was told to check out.
It's the one with the sprite scaling, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Alien 3, yeah.
Okay, I'm a sucker for those sprite scaler games. There's one called...
What
was that?
Me too.
Madness or something, too?
The minecart one is totally weird. We talked about that a few months ago, actually, on one of the episodes. The minecart one is really, really, really weird. Sorry. But yeah, okay, let's move on.
Yes.
Everybody else is like, Jesus Christ, people, we're here for the news.
Yes, of course. Back to the news. Next headline: Nintendo Premier Mario Paint.
Yeah, I needed an S there. Sorry, my notes were poorly written here. Okay, Nintendo's entry into the burgeoning console-based art package market is a true standout that will be a generation's first introduction to digital art.
It's neat that they leaned into this so that we could introduce kids to an art outlet, because the kids don't have this kind of exposure like they do now with tablets and all of that. I remember having a ton of fun with Mario Paint.
Yeah, I mean, I personally only used it like once or twice. A friend of mine had it, but and I mean, obviously I was coming from the Amiga, so I had deluxe paint and stuff, and using a mouse to draw on the screen or manipulate images was second nature to me already. Hell, I've been doing that on the Commodore 64 with stuff like Newsroom. But yeah, it was great to see it on a console. I think that really brought it down to a whole new level and made it so much more, it gave it mass appeal that a normal art package just couldn't have.
Absolutely.
So,
Add the Mario Coda Paint. And they did run with this too with the Japanese release of Mario Paint for the N64 or whatever I don't think it was it Mario
the
Paint
DD,
64?
the 64 DD.
Yes.
Yeah, they didn't call it Mario Paint. It was like there were three art packages. One for, I think, animation, one for 3D modeling, and one for editing, I think. So it wasn't directly Mario Paint, but there was a package of 3 tools. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Interoperable suite of 3 games. Oh, and 1 internet application. Paint Studio, Talent Studio, Polygon Studio, and Communication Kit.
Yeah, and the Communication Kit basically gave you access to like a limited number of web resources that were curated by Nintendo or managed by Nintendo. I can't remember which of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, it was it had that brief legacy, but you never really saw another version of it on any other systems, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it was certainly one of a kind. And if nobody has played that fly swatting game, if there's one thing you try, like load it up on an emulator, you probably have a mouse on this or on a laptop, give it a try. It's a lot of fun, and it illustrates just how accessible that peripheral was, even if it was new to the non-PC people, because I grew up on Kid Cuts, and I was a little bit younger at the time than you were, but I definitely, it was second nature to me to go from working on a computer to clicking some flies.
Yeah, definitely. And the mouse is such a wonderful tool, both for gaming and for art, that it feels weird that it's not necessarily, or it's good that it was introduced to that generation. It's weird when I see my students nowadays, so many of them come into my classroom, and instead of using a laptop for taking notes and stuff, they're using tablets without mice and without keyboards sometimes, or they're using basically their screen looks like a piece of paper and they're actually handwriting on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, you know how much slower that is? And then it's like, oh, I screwed something up. Then they have to click something else to turn the pen into an eraser. Then erase. I'm like, what the frag is wrong with you idiots?
I have a moment of aging. I handed one of my nephews a Game Boy with a flash cart, and I put something on it, and in the panic of trying to figure out what was going on, he tapped the screen.
Oh, that's awesome.
I died a little bit on the inside when that happened.
Oh, that is so awesome.
I didn't realize how out of it I was until that happened, so.
Yeah, see, that's, kids. I actually explained to my students this morning how to calculate how many bits in a byte, how many bytes in a megabyte, and so on and so forth. And this was weird because not a single one of them in the class actually had any idea what a gigabyte was, or knew anything about, it was like, well, you all have laptops here, and this was a class with laptops. It's like, you all have laptops. How many gigabytes of memory are on the laptops? And they all just sort of stared at me like, what is the memory of the computer? I was like, oh, Jesus.
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah. Dude, there's a generation coming up right now that uses computers and has no idea about computers, as opposed to our generation where if you use, my generation especially, if you use computers, it's because you knew a lot about computers. And this widespread use of the machines now by people who have no freaking clue what's going on inside the machine is wonderful and at the same time also scary beyond belief.
It was the writing was on the wall, but here we are.
Yeah.
Aging in a fingerprint, aging in the concept of file sizes.
Oh, Jesus, yes.
Okay. Speaking of sizes, too, we can move on to Sega licenses Laserdiscs.
You are on fire. I love it. Sega has announced that they have begun licensing several older arcade Laserdisc games, such as Cobra Command, for the Sega CD. ImageSoft will be bringing Dragon's Lair to the system as well.
This is a neat format for them to tap into, because, the whole concept of a CD is just a ton of space. Kind of like how the Laserdiscs were at the time for just like, hey, we have a ton of, movie content. And they fit the format well. So this is just kind of a logical step.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The games are already made. Especially games like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, which both get ported to the Sega CD, they've got cachet as far as, name recognition. And you don't really have to do anything else. You're going to have to massively downgrade the video and the audio. But other than that, it's a ready-made product, and the Sega CD has been, it's been out in Japan for a year at this point, and it's just about to come out in North America. It's suffering from a lack of appropriate software. And so, how else are you going to fill up the CDs quickly and economically without having to spend a bunch of money to create that new content? And we will talk later on about, the costs of creating these new multimedia products is going to be one of the other stories later on in the show. But, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I hadn't put together that this was coming to the U.S. because, all these Laserdisc games would be stuff that a lot of Americans would be familiar with. It's not just, we don't have as much of a tendency for appreciating adult visual novels like they were overseas.
Yeah, they will release some of those like Cobra and Snatcher, but they're tough sells in the North American market because, it's just it's not giving you that instant feedback, instant, action, and especially American console gamers are just not used to anything that's adventure-like. You had a couple of games like Maniac Mansion and King's Quest V on the NES, but it's very, very limited.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and those were, hell, if you had released Snatcher on PC back in the day, it totally would have flown. It would have had a market, but on console, it's a very different ball game.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's kind of sad that they didn't license that out for porting. They ported Metal Gear onto home computers, but they didn't do Snatcher, unfortunately. Snatcher on the C64, that totally would have worked.
I'm in. Well, if they can fit a whole Nostromo knockoff onto a C64 game, the sky's the limit.
Oh yeah, dude. Come on, we just got Eye of the Beholder, so it's all good. Everything is possible. And Eye of the Beholder will also come out on the Sega CD, but, that's still a ways away.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've covered arcades, handhelds, and consoles. Let's move over to PC.
Oh, yeah.
Amstrad and Sega team up.
UK electronics maker Amstrad has signed a deal with Sega to release the Mega PC, a PC Mega Drive hybrid system that will allow players to run both Genesis carts and 286 compatible software on a machine priced at just £899.
This is a 286.
Yeah,
being released in 92.
Yeah, this is Amstrad's. Good old Sir Alan Sugar. So for non-UK listeners, Amstrad was basically a company that would release primarily relabeled stuff. Later on, also a lot of their own stuff. But it was all about getting the electronics cheap. So it was like the budget brand that could, break all the other prices. And they had already been in the computer business for a while with the Amstrad CPC line. And we've already talked here several times about their PC compatible machines. And so they've been basically doing cheapo PCs. And now this new device is basically just a 286, and where you might expect a slot for a disk drive, there's a cartridge slot on the front panel of this PC, and you just pop in the cartridge there. And basically what it does is, it's a question, is the video signal coming from the internal console hardware going to the monitor, or is it coming from the PC motherboard? But the two never really interact. You can't harness the 68,000 processor as a coprocessor or anything like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just kind of shoehorning the two together.
Yeah. And, I mean, in theory, it might be a little bit cheaper than buying the two items separately, but now you're essentially stuck playing this thing on a monitor as opposed to a television set, which isn't necessarily going to be the ideal situation. Mm-hmm. Now, curiously enough, and we talked about this a while ago, a similar device was released in Japan called the Terra Drive, which was also a PC with a Genesis, different hardware, and that was a teaming up between Sega and IBM. But that was before the VGA revolution happened. That was before PCs had moved into this high-end territory with Sound Blaster cards and everything else. And yeah, the market has changed. Sorry. The market has changed, and like you said, 286 in this day and age, in the post-Ultima Underworld and Wing Commander era, there's really no reason for this.
Yeah, this episode's kind of been an exercise of too little too late for some of these, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I mean, we talked about this in last Christmas. So in Christmas of 91 was the Christmas where in the United States a ton of PC game publishers had to delay releases because they were going to release games in EGA, and it became painfully obvious that any EGA product was going to be dead in the water. After VGA caught on as quickly as it did, it was like the big purchase for Christmas was a VGA card, so you could also buy VGA software. And it caught everybody by surprise. The adoption of the PC in Europe has been slower than in the US because you still have a fairly robust Amiga market. It's only in the last year or so that the Atari ST market finally collapsed. We're going to talk about it a little bit later in this episode too. The 8-bit market is still going. The ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 are still going. At this point, the ZX Spectrum is owned by Amstrad. So they bought up those. So they've been selling both the Amstrad CPC and the Spectrum. But the CPC market has finally collapsed. They basically shut down production of the Amstrad CPC. They're still selling ZX Spectrums, though. The older machine, but in a more hybrid format. And the C64 is still selling, and the Amiga is still selling. So the PC is finally picking up in Europe, but it is not the dominant, or it doesn't have this absolute dominance in the market like it does in the States. So it kind of makes sense that, maybe we can still get away with selling a 286, but the reality is it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to get really terrible reviews. I actually remember seeing one in a store once, but there's really no point in having this device.
Yeah, that's an interesting, it's a cool footnote in the headlines, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the original idea, and just, I know we need to move on, but the original idea of this device was the PC can't really play good games, so, we can have our work PC and still play cool games by putting a console in there.
Absolutely. I love where their head's at.
Yeah, that was the idea of the Terra Drive, but that was 2 years earlier when it was EGA land with PC Speaker.
Right, exactly. Oh, the PC Speaker.
Oh, exactly. But those times are gone. Those times are over. And now it's, let's see how quickly we can get those high-end machines down in price.
Absolutely. Price war. Absolutely. PC price war hits the UK.
While the prices of PCs are dropping around the world, the UK has seen a sharp battle between at least 3 main manufacturers, Commodore, Ambra, and Elonix. I don't know how it's pronounced. With each dropping the price of their base models by up to 20% in just 1 month. 486 machines can already be purchased for under £1,000, and there is no end to the price drops in sight.
Everyone gets a PC.
Exactly. and this is the interesting thing. This is happening very, very fast. So the transition to the PC that happened in the States over a period of about 4 or 5 years is literally going to happen in Europe within 2 to 3 years. And it's going to really, really cost a lot of people. A lot of companies are going to get into this low-end PC market or low-price PC market, very short, small margins. With the constantly evolving hardware, it means if you guessed wrong as a manufacturer and you're suddenly stuck with inventory, you don't have any place to dump that inventory. You are then completely shut out, and your low margin is going to, blow up in your face. And and companies like Commodore that are trying to get into this space are going to feel that pinch really hard.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom there a little bit.
Oh, not just a little bit. Very, very much so.
Yes.
Yeah. But hey, we all end up benefiting from all the junked machines that ended up in landfills and in our water supply. Okay.
Tasty.
I can taste the silicon. Okay.
Speaking of silicon headlines, Intel running contest to name next-gen chip.
Intel's next big chip, the 0.8 micron 486 successor, currently codenamed P5, may be named by one of its employees as the company is running an in-house contest to suggest names.
So, what ended up winning?
Well, we don't know if the name actually came from anybody internally. According to Wikipedia, it did not. It came from a marketing company called Lexicon Branding, but the name was Pentium. You may have heard of it.
I'm all about the Pentiums.
I was about to say you may have heard of it in a Weird Al Yankovic song, but yeah, you beat me to it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I came on I came into computing around like right when the Pentium came about, so I've only known Pentiums, but yeah, it's interesting. So there was like probably what a P1, P2, P3, P4, and now P5.
No, you had the 286, 386, 486.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so this
and Pentium comes from, I believe it's the Greek word for 5. Pent, like pentagram.
Yeah,
That's where Pentium comes from, because it's supposed to be the 5. The problem is that they had lost a lawsuit trying to prevent other manufacturers from selling 386 and 486 chips. Because they're like, well, that's our name. And unfortunately, you cannot trademark a number. So they had to invent a replacement for 586, and they went with something that suggests 5, the Pentium.
Okay. I learned something today.
Yeah. And so, like a pentagram has 5 corners.
Sure.
Because
if you
it's
break it
5.
down into the word roots, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so that's why they did that, so that nobody else could say, oh, we're selling a Pentium as well. No, you can't, because that's trademarked. And this is where you start getting, all these other names, the Athlons, the Cyrexes, and blah, 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 blah. This is when the chip numbers stop being, the chip designations stop being numbers and start just being weird names. And obviously the original Pentium architecture has nothing to do with many of the later Pentiums, like the Pentium 2, Pentium 3, and so forth. But the name stuck as a brand name.
I like it.
Yeah. And I think they just recently discontinued the last of the Pentium chips.
Yeah, they're all named after lakes now, and whatever landmarks they decide to pick on.
Exactly.
We went there, but I guess it makes sense.
You got to find some designation. It's like, it's like with cars. There's the car model names have virtually nothing to do with anything other than, well, it sounds cool.
Right.
So, yeah.
It was only a matter of time.
But it used to be easy. It was numbers. Okay.
Right. Well, speaking of sounding cool, Amiga Joker reviews Atari Falcon.
Atari's latest iteration of the ST, the Falcon 030, gets a review in Germany's biggest Amiga mag, Amiga Joker. While the hardware is impressive, the 1400 mark base price, which is more than twice the going rate of an Amiga 500, and the lack of any signs of software development outside of Atari itself, means the system is all but certain to fail. Yeah, have you ever heard of the Atari? Well, do you know what an Atari ST is?
I do. I at least know what an Atari ST is. I mean, I know some of these other words, but I was going to lean on you to give some flavor to them.
Okay, so the Atari ST, also known as the Jackintosh, was the first computer released by Atari after Jack Tramiel took over. 16-bit, 68,000 machine. Low cost, keyboard based with external floppy drive in the original iteration, later on a built-in floppy drive. And that device was supposed to be, the next iteration. This was 1985. And they've been doing iterations of it, the STE, the ST. I don't know all the different iterations. I'm not that well versed in the ST. But they basically just keep trying to upgrade it a little bit at a time. The Falcon 030, which was being developed sort of in parallel with the Jaguar, and the Panther system, which was the console that was never released, that they had just recently canceled, has a lot of hardware overlap with the Jaguar. Like, it also supports the Jaguar controllers and stuff like that. But it also does a bunch of really cool things. It still has the MIDI ports, which were standard already in the original Atari ST from 85, but adds a bunch of additional stuff for video editing and so forth. But the problem with the machine is, number one, they're not selling enough machines anymore to move into real economies of scale. And they've yeah, it's just too little too late in a non-DOS compatible system.
Yeah.
So they're coming out with this system. It upgrades the graphics. It does everything that essentially Commodore is going to do with the Amiga 1200 the next year, which will be their first major upgrade to the graphics and the processor. And the Falcon 030 comes ahead of it and is unfortunately just way too expensive. The availability of the machine is too restricted. And yeah, it's going to fail. It will also be the last computer that Atari releases before shifting gears to go completely console only with the Jaguar. So, and yeah, so they'll release the Jaguar, I believe, late 93. They have a limited release, and then in 94 they'll have the wide release, and then in 95 they'll cease to be.
Oof. Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like it went about the same way the Jaguar did.
Yeah, only much, much quicker.
Sure.
It has a very short lifespan. If you want to know more about it, check out part 2 of my interview with Leonard Trammell, because, yeah, we talk about the Falcon 030 quite a bit in there. But yeah, so this was Atari's and the Atari ST fan base, which was quite rabid. There's still some magazines dedicated to them, relatively small publications, but magazines dedicated to them, and these guys are just hardcore. They make Amiga fans seem like, hobbyists or, fair weather fans. The ST guys are just hardcore. The letters pages of those magazines is like, those people spending $3,000 on their PCs to do desktop publishing. We're doing it with our, 1985 machines, and it's great, type of thing. It's pretty kick-ass. These guys are crazy. But, so that's the end of Atari in the computer field.
Sounds like it. Moving on, WinZip reviewed.
One of the most ubiquitous bits of software over the last 30 years gets reviewed in this month's Compute magazine. WinZip by Nico Mack is a Windows 3.1 front end for PKZip and PKUnzip that allows easy viewing of zipped files contents by simply double-clicking on them.
But I like typing PKZip and having to get the exact file name and all the right switches.
Yes, masochism. It's a character trait. Yeah, WinZip is a revelation. It really does show the advantages of a GUI over DOS in so many ways. And the fact that WinZip is still around to this day is, testament to just how useful that application really is.
And not one registered user since.
I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of times I've clicked on no to the to the registration.
I'll register later.
I'll register later. Yeah, I'll get to it at some point.
No, this is an exciting point. Yeah, your point exactly where it's. Yeah, it's just this whole level of computing that was accessible to the nerds who knew how to type, to just moving the mouse and just streamlining everything. It's really the beginning of a new era for something as simple as compressing a file.
Yeah. And when you think about it, how many people actually know what that even means, that it's a compressed file? They don't understand that. They just know I was sent one file and there's 5 files inside that file. So that's it.
That's the one. That's like a nesting doll.
Exactly. A nesting doll where you had to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze.
Right.
And then when you pull it back out, you got to glue all the pieces back together because you broke it. And yeah.
We have struggles with that to this day for this recording. I think the video file I sent over came over. I had to split the zip, but it compressed it enough that it didn't even split, so...
Oh, there you go.
The struggle's real. That's neat, though. Yeah, so 92, that's the beginning of a new era.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we've talked this year a couple times about how Windows 3.1 is this sea change. And it really is. I mean, it just changes everything. And in many, and I would say for the better. And yes, you could argue that things like the Atari ST and the Amiga both had GUIs 6 years earlier, but not without a hard drive in the system. And without the resolution and the ability to show full color graphics and everything else that came with Windows 3.1, the functionality was limited. And once we get the internet, all bets are off.
Exactly. Plus, we'd never get the beautiful Monty Python point-and-click adventure that came out for Windows 3.1.
But we had Monty Python, the computer game from Probe Software, from Core Design, back in like 88 or 89.
Oh, I need to check that one out.
You haven't played that?
No.
Oh, dude, the manual alone was so freaking funny. It's a jump and run game drawn in the style of the Monty Python cartoons.
That's incredible.
Oh yeah, no, if you haven't played it, dude, yeah, no. You have to play it. You got to play the Amiga version. It's got the best sound and the best scrolling and best color depth. So even though the graphics are probably 1-to-1 the same as the Atari ST, but it has much smoother scrolling and the sound is better, and it's got a bunch of clips from the show, and it's a great game. Oh,
that's really cool. Yeah, I mean, my first experience was with the Holy Grail game for, that was Windows 3.1.
Yeah. That was Windows, probably Windows 3.11, but yeah.
Well, I know it runs on 3.1 because I've played through it recently. Okay. So I found it at a thrift store for not very much money.
Oh, cool!
Way more money worth of time and enjoyment out of it, but it was they were able to. I mean, it was the beginning of. I don't know if it shipped with QuickTime or not, but it was the beginning of I guess captured in a GUI, like running videos. And letting the OS do its thing versus having to make sure you have the right graphics hardware and things are working right with the sound card. It was just look at it.
Oh yeah. Well, this is why I was wondering if it's 3.1 or 3.11, because 3.11 adds a bunch of multimedia stuff. That's why.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, this I do believe this one did install QuickTime or something to facilitate it playing videos, and there's a decent amount of the movie in there too. On the main menu, you can click watch the movie, and it shows like a frame from like each bit of the movie that plays through the whole thing very quickly, and it's just the humor like that. Could only be done on a CD.
Yeah, and QuickTime. Yeah, that's a big thing for Apple at this point. They keep talking about QuickTime out. They're, the computers aren't really all our thing. We're the creating new standards and stuff. And they're promoting QuickTime in a massive, massive way at this point. As the wave of the future for multimedia. And in many ways for quite a while it was. So. But, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, moving from multimedia to other types of media. PC Games debut.
The longest-running games mag today in Germany, PC Games, debuted this month with issue 1. From the same company that was already publishing the multi-platform Playtime and the Amiga magazine Amiga Games, PC Games was the first German mag to be purely dedicated to DOS and Windows-based games, and would rise to become one of the two major surviving publications in Germany today.
That's really neat. Yeah, they this is the beginning. How long did the publication last?
It's still running. It's still a monthly magazine.
Oh, this is the one that's still going. Oh, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, they're still going to this day. Curiously enough, with virtually the same logo. I think they may have changed the typeface a little bit, but that's it. And they're still going. Another magazine called GameStar, which started, probably about 10, 15 years ago now, that's also still running. There's one or two magazines dedicated to console games exclusively, but they're much, much newer. So yeah, this is like this weird relic of this time. I remember when first issue of this came out, because, you know, it didn't have a lot of friends who were PC gamers at this point. But it was one of those ones like, oh, okay, there's a PC games magazine. That's an interesting concept. But everybody else at this point is still multi-format. So, yeah. And, yeah, like I said, they're still going to this day.
Yeah, that's really neat. I apologize. I caught the note from our next headline.
Yeah.
I promise. And you literally said one of the two major surviving publications in Germany today.
Yeah.
That's really neat. So go check out PC games on the German magazine shelves if they.
Yeah. It's kind of scary how many magazines still get published over here. I mean, when I walk by the magazine rack in the grocery store, it's like there's at least 4 or 5 game magazines, then not counting that there's 2 retro gaming publications that are still showing up on the newsstands. And yeah, so still kind of cool that they're out there. And in 20 years, if I'm still doing this show, that will probably be the last resource for this era that I can fall back on. So
that's really scary and really interesting to think about. Yeah, because I felt PC gamer since forever here in the U.S. and they've gone fully online. And it's, it's good. Yeah, I don't think you can't replace just picking up. I mean, people say this about books, but like magazines too, having that physical, just flipping through pages and reading things. And I've actually kept my original PC gamer collection, and I going through. I have the articles on like Duke Nukem Forever, like the first. I guess that was the Quake engine incarnation of it. I don't remember, but it's really neat. It's definitely a something that's captured in time versus something that exists as electrons in this vast internet.
Exactly. Yeah, and so much of the old news articles from back in the day are no longer there, and most of the websites like IGN, for example, you can't search IGN by original publication date.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you can search for articles based off of keywords, but then they'll just tell you when was the last time the article was updated. And a lot of them have been automatically updated for formatting purposes and changes the dates on them.
Oh, wow.
So I've tried to use IGN as a source of information for the show, and I can't, because the best I can do is go to the Wayback Machine to that month and keep hitting different dates and try to get some headlines off of there. Mm-hmm. But that's all I can do.
And that's probably missing image links and content too.
If it's on the Wayback Machine, yes, and then trying to find that same article without seeing that it's been updated 20 times afterwards.
True.
Screws it all up. And also a lot of the articles back in the day, they'd split the text of the article over multiple pages.
Oh, gross.
GameSpy was really, really bad with this. Well, the reason they did it is because when you clicked on the next page, it would give you new ad banners. So it was a way of exposing you to new ad banners. Problem is the Wayback Machine would only grab the first page.
Interesting, yeah, because it wouldn't crawl that deep. Man,
exactly.
That's depressing to think about. You couldn't... Yeah, I mean, you can't blame for that stuff at the time.
No. So there's huge swaths of news and old game reviews and stuff that are simply missing. They simply don't exist. And we're not even going to talk about websites that have gone under. The moment a website goes belly up, it's gone.
Right.
You don't pay the web server this month, it's gone. And that is one of the advantages of having these physical things. Now, fortunately, there are enough countries, like there's another magazine, we'll talk about its launch, I believe in 85 or 86, called Micromania in Spain, and they're still going as well. Yeah. The only problem is with these, most of them are PC game magazines. Mm-hmm. because console game magazines, not the majority, well, actually probably the majority of them, tend to be system focused, which means as soon as the system dies, the magazine dies. So you're constantly then looking for, well, which magazine's cropped up for the next system. And that's another one of those difficult things to capture or to follow up on.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But oh well.
Well, one of the ways that we can re-preserve these is Electronic Games is back.
One of the OG game mags from the early 80s gets a revival by Arnie Katz and Bill Kunkel, promising to be a games mag for those that aren't teenagers but are high school and college students and beyond. Now, those were their terminology for this, not mine. So apparently, being a 17-year-old high school student is not being a teenager anymore, but I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, it's cool to see. It's cool to hear something like this, going away and coming back. That was kind of the link I was making. But
yeah. Well, and Arnie Katz and Bill Kunkel are like the OG game reviewers. They were the first guys publishing game reviews back in, there was a magazine for video, so video and hi-fi people. And they were publishing game reviews of 2600 cartridges in there back in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
They're like the old school. And so, and their magazine, Electronic Games, is now back. So we've been talking about that magazine for a couple months because it's, at this point, it's basically they're starting this magazine up again exactly 10 years, or almost exactly 10 years after they started the previous magazine. And the previous magazine goes defunct, I think, in 84 or 85. Okay. And this one is going to last only until June of 93. So it's not even going to last a year. Yeah. But they're just coming in way too late into an already very crowded market. And even though they say that it's supposed to be for more mature audiences, the layout and everything is just screaming kid-friendly. And that's just not going to cut it. If they had done a different layout, if they'd really attempted to make a more mature magazine, I think they could have done better. But it's just another gaming magazine at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's not going to get any thinner with those types of publications too.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was nice for people who appreciated the original series, seeing them come back for last hurrah.
Yeah, definitely a last hurrah.
In other news, corporate news, Broderbund expands affiliate label program.
Following in the footsteps of Electronic Arts, Broderbund has expanded its affiliate label program by adding New World Computing, of Might and Magic fame, the Waterford Institute, which makes early learning educational software, and ASCII Entertainment, a subsidiary of ASCII Japan, best known for Spellcraft. This is coming as their 4-year deal to distribute Maxis Software's products is coming to an end.
I always thought New World Computing did really well, because I played so much Heroes of Might and Magic, and then I find out that was not it was not as big as I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I guess we should probably also clarify something for people who haven't been following this. Do you know what an affiliated label program is?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So when a game publisher builds up a network of representatives around the country to go to software stores and say, hey, you guys should carry our software. Let's cut a deal. They show them a catalog of available titles. Now, the more titles you have available to you, the more likely you are to get into the store. Because if a title that they are stocking doesn't sell, and you have a whole bunch of other titles, then you can say, well, we'll just switch it out for another title that we have. And the store will be like, cool, that doesn't cost me a lot of effort. We'll put the new title in and see if that sells. If you are a company that only has one or two products and one of them ends up not selling, now the store owner has to find a different product to put on the shelf from somebody else because you don't have anything to offer them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Stuck with their...
Yeah, you're either stuck with theirs, or now you have to make a bunch of phone calls, find another distributor who wants that spot, and that is time consumption. And in the time when you're trying to get somebody else to fill that spot, well, those are days when that spot is not earning you any money as a store owner. And every spot on the shelf has to be earning you money in relatively frequent intervals. Because otherwise you're not going to make rent.
Mm-hmm.
So the bigger the catalog, the easier it is to replace non-selling titles with selling titles. And so you're the better investment from the retailer standpoint. This is why an affiliated label program is when a publisher signs up other companies and they don't become the publisher. They're not financing those other companies' products. But what they are doing is saying, hey, we'll add your games to our catalog. So when the retailers are ordering new stuff, they can choose yours as well as ours. So this means our catalog looks bigger. We're a more attractive partner for the stores. And you, who may not be as big, you get the extra advantage of getting into more stores that would normally not touch you because you don't have enough product, and you don't have to pay a bunch of additional representatives to travel around the country and constantly make phone calls and have that infrastructure. You just let us handle it. We'll do all the shipping from our place, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately moving more product.
Exactly. And this was one of Trip Hawkins' great innovations, was the affiliate label program. So while EA had a relatively large initial lineup of software and had invested heavily in building that network, the affiliate label program allowed them, with virtually no investment, to have suddenly a much larger catalog that they could then leverage.
Right.
Okay.
Neat.
And yes? Yeah, so there were a bunch of companies like Origin Systems had originally been an EA affiliate. Broderbund, I can't remember if they were originally no, Broderbund was never. But Ubisoft was originally an EA affiliate. So, yeah. And they even had these little stickers that they put on the games, like my copy of BAT. BAT has an EAD, Electronic Arts Distribution sticker on it to this day. So, yeah. And so Broderbund is now going to do the same. And Broderbund has just recently gone onto the stock market, and they need this because their deal with Maxis, makers of the SimCity and SimAnt and all these sim games, that contract is running out. Now, that contract came about because Will Wrights used to publish his games through Broderbund, but he took SimCity. He was going to do SimCity on his own, even though contractually Broderbund would have had a right to it. If you want to know more about this, please check out the first part of my interview with Don Daglow, who was producer at Broderbund at this time. He goes into the details of it because he's the one who convinces Broderbund to do the distribution for the game. And so now that deal is coming to an end, and Maxis is going to become its own publisher before being gobbled up by EA, they need more games to fill that catalog. And I also talked to one of the not co-founder, but one of the early big contributors at New World Computing. I'll put that interview in the links below as well. And he talks about how this relationship with EA developed. They had a relationship with EA, and now they're going to have this relationship with Broderbund. So they basically have a foot in each side, because they've licensed some of the Might and Magic games for porting to the Genesis by EA.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so there's a Might and Magic game for the Genesis that was released by EA. And this was New World Computing's way of getting onto console by going through EA, which had a license to produce games. Well, license, put that in quotation marks, to produce games on the Genesis.
Right.
Yeah, because they reverse engineered it and weren't originally paying, but then they worked out a deal anyway, and this is how a bit of software that they had originally thought might become Madden becomes Joe Montana football on the Genesis. Again, check out my interview with Michael Katz for that information. I'll put all this in the links in the show notes. Go check all that out. Then basically that'll be your homework. Come back, everybody, and continue listening to the episode.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. It definitely helps the background.
Yeah. So it literally comes down to Broderbund needs more software because Broderbund is basically a two-trick pony at this point.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the Carmen Sandiego games and they've got Print Shop.
I couldn't think of what their main one was. Yeah, I remember Print Shop.
Yeah, they also have Prince of Persia, but that's only one game so far, and the second game won't come out for another year or so. So, and then after that, there won't be another game. So it's not like, it's a steady cash cow.
Yeah, I think Ubisoft ended up with the Prince of Persia license after that.
Yeah, they end up purchasing the rights after Broderbund goes belly up.
Got it.
And Carmen Sandiego ends up someplace else. Yeah, let's not talk about that. Oh my God, no, let's not talk about that. So bad. So terribly bad.
Some labels that were lapsing too during this time?
So EA lost two big affiliated labels, the Software Toolworks, of Chessmaster 2000 fame, who are getting really, really big into CD at this point. So if you bought a PC CD-ROM drive around this time, you probably got like 5 or 10 CDs, without jewel case or anything. To go along with it, and those were all coming, or pretty much all of them were coming from the Software Toolworks.
Did they have Mavis Beacon too?
Yeah, Mavis Beacon is their big cash cow.
Ooh, yeah, that was a big one too. I definitely remember them from that.
Yeah, and we talked about this last month or the month before that they just cut a deal with LucasArts, so they're going to be distributing LucasArts CD-ROM software. And LucasArts had been distributed by EA. And now that has come to an end, so they're sort of shifting over to doing some of the publishing themselves, but also letting Software Toolworks do their CD product. And so EA's picked up a bunch of new companies. There's Pop Rocket, Nova Logic that's about to do the Comanche series, eBook, I have no idea what they produce, Humongous Entertainment, which is the company from Ron Gilbert's company doing educational software. Zelos, no idea what that was, and ICOM Simulations. I think they do some flight simulators, but I could be wrong there. So, EA is trying to fill the gap. They never know which ones are going to hit big, but they definitely are feeling the pinch, because the deal with affiliated labels is they're helping you fill out your catalog, but at the same time, you're getting them exposure. As soon as these guys get big enough, they're going to go out on their own and do their own thing.
Right.
And that's exactly what next company did.
Yep. Speaking of EA moves, EA buys Origin.
We talked about this last month in reference to Bard's Tale 4, but the details of the story are now coming out. Origin, which had been wholly owned by the Garriots, Richard, Robert, and their parents, has now been acquired by EA. In exchange, they received 1.3 million shares of EA stock, which, given the stock price at the time, would have been roughly $54.6 million worth of EA stock. Not too shabby. The Garriott brothers and Chris Roberts have committed to stay with Origin for at least 4 years.
Because you never turn down that EA money when they're knocking their coffers open.
Yeah, that sweet, sweet stock. So, yeah, the interesting thing here for me was that Origin was still completely owned by the Garriott family. That I did not know before this. I thought maybe they had an IPO, maybe they had outside investors, but it was a company that had been started by Richard, just by making games. Robert had come in to help him manage the whole thing, and it had grown so organically they probably never needed that. But the reason why they're selling the company is not because he doesn't want to be independent, because Richard is extremely independent. It's because the budgets for the games are getting so big they can't manage it. And at this point, they really only have 2 product lines that are really making a profit, which is the mainline Ultima games and the Wing Commander titles. Mm-hmm. They have Ultima Underworld. That's a new thing, but that's also being developed by an outside studio, Looking Glass. And so the problem right now is if they're going to go really big, especially with Wing Commander 3, which is going to have, it's going to be the big $4 million video extravaganza. Ultima 8, which even though it's going to be a complete and total dud, is there. Who knows what the costs are going to be of the multimedia, and so on and so forth. So they need that cash injection from EA to continue to get that cinematic presentation that Wing Commander has kind of made everybody expect.
Yeah, Wing Commander comes to mind immediately, thinking of just the extra funding that, definitely would not have happened had this not happened, or if there was somebody else who didn't come along with
cash. No, it would have been
cash, yeah.
It would have been impossible to do Wing Commander 3 and even worse, Wing Commander 4 without EA funding.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, it pays off. It's just there's no way they were going to be able to get the loans and everything else that they needed to make Wing Commander 3. They just needed a big publisher to do it. Mm-hmm. And this is going to put the screws to a lot of quote-unquote independent developers. The multimedia race, the Sillywood era, which is now about to dawn, is going to, separate out. It was already a big jump to go from the art assets that EGA games required and the art assets that VGA games required. It was already a huge leap.
Right. And then throw video into the mix, too.
Throw video into the mix and you're in a whole different price category.
Yep.
And, I mean, you went from the beeper to digital audio to now recorded audio. If you look at, for example, the credits of old EGA Sierra games, which were considered, big, lush games with tons of screens of graphics and stuff. If you look at something like King's Quest IV, The Perils of Rosella, you maybe had 3 people doing the graphics. You might have had 2 people doing the programming. There's no audio. There's no spoken audio. You got a couple of MIDI level files for the sound. It's nothing. And now suddenly King's Quest V, which comes out the Christmas before, you have VGA graphics that have to be drawn by hand first and then brought into the computer. You've got animation of, close-ups of people talking. Even though it's just the mouth moving up and down, it's still there's shit going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that needs to be created. All of that needs to be funded. All those people need to be paid before you ship the product. And that is something that's going to knock a lot of people simply out of the race. Sadly.
Mm-hmm. But there are other big companies trying to make moves too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Such as Sierra acquires Brightstar.
Sierra is trying to move back into the educational arena by buying Brightstar Technology, a company that specializes in educational titles for the Mac. They would release a handful of games before being disbanded.
Trying to think if I know anything by Brightstar.
Probably not. Their Mac stuff was Mac stuff.
That's true.
You know, it's one of those things where, you know, if you weren't on a Mac, you never saw it. And when they were at Sierra, just looking this up again because I did look this up earlier. So they did Ready, Set, Read, and Bananas and Jack with Bananas and Jack. Spelling Jungle, Spelling Blizzard, Math and Spelling with Monker. Yeah, I mean these are games, I guess. The Spelling Blizzard, I mean, I've recognized the package because I saw it at some point. Or at least I saw it in the old Sierra magazine.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
you know, this is not something that set the world on fire, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. But there was still a market for them. It's interesting, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, it's such a very specific space for kids' games and also on the Mac, specifically.
Yeah. And that's the big thing. It's like, on the Mac, okay, you know, you have a very captive audience. Because there's only so much that you know, people basically, what else are you going to buy, right? But as soon as you get to PC, with companies like Humongous Entertainment out there, the market had just gotten very, very tight.
Sure.
And I think that Sierra had been a big player in entertainment software early on. They had the Disney license and had done things like Donald Duck's Playground, and there was, I think, an ABC game with Mickey Mouse and stuff like this. But it wasn't ever going to be as, you know, they were never going to get back into that space without dedicating massive resources to it. Mm-hmm. And it's obvious why Ken Williams buys the company. He's trying to get that. And in my interview with him and in his book, he talks about how he kind of wanted Sierra to be everything to everybody, to cover every possible area of software. Even though we think of Sierra today as, you know, the point-and-click company, they were in everything. I mean, they were application software, you know, design your own garden software. All sorts of stuff was coming out of Sierra. And they were selling a lot of programs. And education software just would have been a natural fit.
Sure. And the other thought I had too is that I guess, you know, growing up with you know, schools that had like computer labs and all that, they were generally Macs and they would be earmarked for this educational software.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense that you would. Now, the reason you had Macs was simply because of that legacy of Apple, you know, almost giving away the hardware to schools.
Right.
That goes back to the 80s. And also them lobbying to get tax write-offs for it, which they succeeded in doing.
Right.
But yeah, it is one of those things where, you know, there's a market for it. It was really, really... good programs could be very effective. I mean, who doesn't know that people who went west in a caravan got dysentery? We all know this. Thanks to computer software. But yeah, so fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of things on their way out, rest in peace. High-tech hits the skids.
8-bit computer game powerhouse High-Tech, famous for Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera licensed platformers, has hit financial trouble. The collapse of the Amstrad CPC market has hit them hard, and their banks have cut their financing. Without new funding, they will have to close down.
What?
Yeah, they're gone. Now, High-Tech is a company not to be confused with High-Tech, what was it called? High-Tech Solutions or High-Tech Software, the American company that did a lot of licensed educational software and all those print package programs from the 90s. That's not these guys. This is High-Tech with just HI-TEC. They had a system for fairly quick turnover where they would develop software on, I think, the Atari ST, and then they could just cross-compile it and also pretty much automate the conversion of the graphics to the ZX Spectrum, the C64, the Amstrad CPC, and the Amiga. And so the games, some of them were very thrown together very quickly. Some of them were actually quite good. But in the later days of the 8-bit computers, they were one of the big suppliers with a pretty steady flow of new games coming to the systems. And their final game, a Daffy Duck game, would actually get reviewed in Zap 64, a UK magazine, get 94%, which was one of the highest scores Zap ever handed out. But then not see the light of day until 2015, when a virtually complete version of the code was discovered and then released by, I think it was Games That Weren't, were the ones who originally released it. Or somebody else may have released it first and they reposted it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And the game looks amazing. I mean, the artwork on it, especially for a C64 game, is really cool. The sprites look awesome. It's just, one of those games where you, the owner of the company even says in this article that I've linked to that, hey, if we don't get any more money, that's it. And that was it. That was the end of the game.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
That's a pour one out moment.
It is, and they said, that suddenly the Amstrad CPC market wasn't there anymore, and they could probably still make the numbers as long as they had, the 5 platforms, but as soon as one of the platforms was gone, game over.
Yeah, definitely playing right on the edge there.
Yeah, I mean, it was always a model that was never sustainable because these systems were going to die. There was no way of keeping them alive forever. I guess they were just hoping, maybe we can get, 1 or 2 big pieces of software out, and that might give us that extra leg up. But alas, it was not meant to be.
Yeah, you hate to see it.
You hate to see it, but it was inevitable. Mm-hmm. Unless they could dramatically change where they were going with it. They needed to get onto DOS really, really bad in a big way, but there was so much, I think, too much competition probably at that point. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. That is the end of our stories, I believe. We have nothing else for today. Except, of course, the co-host's final duty to determine the phrase or the word of the episode.
Spy.
Spy. I like it. I spy with my little eye that everybody should be signing up and following us and giving us likes and give us a review in your podcasting app of choice, please. I haven't gotten a review on Apple Podcasts for like 3 years. Come on, guys. Show some love. And sign up for the Patreon. $1 a month gets you access to all our fun goodies, including the video versions of the 7 Minutes in Heaven. And, John, where can people find your other good work?
Well, I do want to say that you got to find your tuna sandwich to get the reviews on the podcast. What kind of recipe would you ask for?
A tuna sandwich?
Just anything.
Oh, anything. Recipes. What recipes do I want? What I need right now is a really good pumpkin pie recipe.
Ooh, there you go. Leave your pumpkin pie recipes in your reviews.
Especially if you got a really good buttery crust. Anybody with a good buttery crust, I am all ears.
There you go. Well, you can find Retro Game Squad on all of your favorite podcast sources. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I don't know what these other services are calling each other, but just go to RetroGameSquad.com. You can't miss us. We're also on Twitter at Retro Game Squad. We got a lot of good times, a lot of good people, and we get to meet amazing people like Carl here.
Yeah, and the Discord server. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Discord.RetroGameSquad.com.
Yeah, you guys do a great job of keeping a good community going there. And I am happy to say that I have been listening to you for almost the entire 10 years now. And I look forward to every episode. I really do.
That's amazing. I appreciate you, man. This was a whole, this happening right here is such a whole clandestine, I couldn't have asked for it. It's just, I'm so happy it came to fruition. So, always an honor to be on, and I appreciate, just spending some time.
I always love having you here, dude. I said it at the top, you're everybody's favorite co-host. Granted, I say that about every co-host, but still, you are our favorite co-host.
I'm my favorite
when
co-host.
Somebody else isn't the co-host.
Fair enough.
Okay, so everybody, have fun.